All right, so we'll get started here. It's 1:02, and I know everybody's time is valuable. So thank you for carving out a section of your day to join us today. We're going to be discussing the 6 simple steps to IT compliancy with a conversation between two leading experts in this arena, Matt Zolio from Zog Incorporated and Emily Vandiver from Interactive Security, where we're going to try to make this as easy as an easy button. It can be a little bit confusing and daunting when looking at this topic, but like I said, we're going to hit this easy button. So why don't we introduce our two panelists today, Matt Zolio. Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks. I'm Matt Zolio from Zog, and we're in just as a background for kind of framing the discussion today. We're an MSP, also a value-added reseller for infrastructure, and our company typically operates as an IT department for hire. We focus on the small, medium business market, mid-market type community, and the advantage or value we bring is we're a big enough group where we're able to bring subject matter experts for varying topics to the table when organizations are faced with different types of situations like security and compliance. So one of the things that we've really found is, and what kind of spurred on this conversation, started a couple of years back. We were having a lot of our clientele coming to us saying, kind of started out as like little letters they would get from an insurance carrier or a client or a vendor, just saying, hey, can you fill out this security questionnaire? It was often like 2 or 3 questions. Now it's evolved into, pages of questions and compliance. And we have clients literally on a daily basis coming to us saying, hey, we need to get through this and be able to prove that we're, compliant so we can continue to do business with people. So as this thing developed, and it was developing quickly, we kind of put together a tool stack, or a stack of tools on our end that would help people get to their compliance level, but found that there was still some missing gaps. And what we ended up deciding on, and it was very intentional, is we wanted to create an environment where the clients that we work with are able to get an audit-like experience, not an audit-like experience, an audit experience from a third-party vendor who's able to look at the work that we're doing, also to help provide policies, procedures, and framework for us to abide by. So just like you would for an accounting department, we said, okay, we're going to, instead of having the accounting department audit themselves, let's find a really strong partner in somebody who can audit our work, make the recommendations for security. And we deal with the lifting as far as the implementation of the tools, solutions, and systems needed to enact all these policies and procedures. So on the line here, I have Emily Vandiver with me. He's from Interactive Security. We've been working together for a couple of years at this point, and have really found that as a team, we're able to help people get through their compliance, make it a lot less confusing. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Emily.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Preston, for having me join today. Looking forward to the conversation. By way of introduction, my name is Emily Vandiver. I'm a partner here at Interactive Security. And we as a company, we've been around for over 12 years now, kind of actually before cybersecurity was much of a thing. And that's really changed over those years, especially in the last year. But what we do here, as Matt alluded to, we are an independent third-party cybersecurity audit and assessment firm. So we don't offer any type of managed services solutions from an IT perspective, et cetera. We are the ones that would audit and assess our clients' current state from an IT perspective, as well as from a policy, procedure perspective as it relates to IT and security. And as Matt alluded to as well, we have been seeing the same thing in the marketplace out there, where clients are really in a new position and have a new challenge at their feet in terms of meeting, some specific cybersecurity requirement, typically being driven, say, by a customer that's now requiring they do something, maybe go become compliant against a certain standard, or do an annual cybersecurity risk assessment by a third party, or something even simpler like, needing to do an annual penetration test. So we saw that out there. So we said, hey, we can really help our customers by working together with the customer involved and helping them meet this new challenge of becoming cybersecurity compliant, et cetera. So thanks again for having me today.
So I thought it'd make a lot of sense, Emory, for us to talk a little bit about the difference between security and compliance, because and we're guilty of it as well as IT folk, that will sometimes talk about them interchangeably, but they really are separate areas. For example, Zog, we work on the security side of the equation here. I see the slide you have up on screen, Preston, and that's exactly right. We're focused on the tool stacks, making sure that the reporting's in place, making sure that the way things are connected in a network put you in a really secure fashion. And Emory can talk to kind of the compliance side of how that goes together.
Yeah, absolutely. So correct. Cybersecurity and cybersecurity compliance are definitely not the same thing. One does not equal the other, that's for sure. But at a high level, cybersecurity is basically the term used that companies are focused on when they're looking at, protecting their company from cyber breach or a hack, that sort of thing. We've heard about ransomware, phishing attempts, all that stuff. So securing against cyber attack or cyber breach is what cybersecurity is. Falls into tools, technologies that are implemented, policies and procedures of how employees work and how systems are put together, all again in an effort to protect the company against outside malicious, unintended, unwelcomed breach.
So
now, when we talk about
Emory, I was going to interject just on like an example would be frequently Emory will provide a password policy, which on the surface often seems like a really simple topic, and then as you dig in, you realize like anything, there's a complexity to it. So they'll hand off the policy to us, and then we have to find the existing tools, new tools, and means to be able to enforce and get that policy to happen. So there's he builds the compliant policy, we put the tools in place to make that happen. So that would be sort of an example of how they're the same but different. Right.
And then when we talk about cybersecurity compliance, that's something very specific. So for an organization to be compliant against a standard, that would essentially mean that an auditor comes in and says, company X is meeting all of the requirements, all of the rules, regulations, controls that standard requires the company do. So if there's 100 different line items across technologies and tools being implemented and being used correctly, and certain policies and procedures being documented within the company and being enforced, if all that is being met according to whichever standard we're talking about, then the company would be audited, and the attestation of compliance can be issued. And as we'll talk about later on, there are many different compliance standards and regulations out there. So if you're looking to become compliant against one of those, then you just have to go through that process of ensuring that you are meeting all the requirements and be audited as such.
So that actually leads me right to where I was going to kind of ask you a question on. One of the most frequent things we get is we'll have an organization say, you know what, I need to be HIPAA compliant, I need to be PCI compliant, I need to be SOC compliant, and it's always a mix of multiple compliances. How do you help somebody, like what's the way you go about approaching that so that they're not trying to go through 6 or 7 audits at the same time?
Right. So in any business, in any time, efficiency is always key. So if an organization is looking or needing to become compliant against multiple standards, like you said, Matt, for example, HIPAA, PCI, maybe a third as well. What we ultimately want to do with the client, we'll consult along these lines, is say we can do a gap analysis and prepare the client along the lines of those various standards at the same time. Because ultimately, many of the standards overlap to a large degree. There might just be some uniqueness to different ones at different times. But a lot of them are based on fundamental principles, so it just makes a whole lot more sense, makes things a lot more efficient, if possible and wherever possible, to do this work kind of simultaneously with the customer once, say annually, versus 3 different audits, across 12 months. We can do them all at the same time, and it just, like I said, it makes things a lot more efficient, less hair pulling on the customer side, a lot less time, required, which also ultimately results in a lower cost at the same time.
So when someone has multiple compliances to go to, is there a base benchmark that you work towards? Do you work towards CMMC? Do you work towards NIST? That sort of, what's the direction that we would pursue?
Yeah. Well, again, it depends on the specific compliance standard that's being pursued. Most compliance standards are based on fundamental frameworks. NIST is one that most people will be familiar with. A lot of the standards are based on the NIST framework. For example, PCI for sure, CMMC is very heavily based on the NIST framework. So we'll be starting there. But from a policy procedure perspective, a lot of these standards are going to require the same policies and procedures be in place. There just might be some characteristics of them that might need to be tweaked. For example, PCI versus HIPAA, they might just have like a different requirement around, remote access or password, complexity, et cetera. But yeah, there's a lot of common ground shared amongst these standards.
So when we start with someone, one of the first things we started observing was, we would get handed the letter from the vendor or the insurance carrier, whomever, and it would be, hey, Zog team, you're the IT department. Here's this letter we got. Make sure all these things are covered so we're compliant. And what we found over time is that we always have to take a step back and go, okay, what are you actually doing right? What are you doing wrong? And the different ways that you have to protect yourself and the number of angles that have to be considered has gotten exponentially larger over time. So part of the first step in the process, and this is where we engage interactive early on, is we start with a risk assessment kind of / gap analysis. So if I use those terms interchangeably for this discussion, it's the same. There are some differences, but we want to start understanding the baseline of where you are, what your goals are, So the assessment and gap analysis for someone trying to achieve CMMC compliance versus someone going for HIPAA compliance could be very different. So it's not every company's security posture and compliance and policies match each other. So what we do is we first work with Emory and his team. We put together the proper risk assessment, and they come back with that analysis that says, here's what you need to do in order to achieve your goal. So once we have that first piece done, then we take a second step back and we say, okay, before we do anything, let's get Emory and his team to put together the policies and procedures with you and your group to make sure that everything is in line. And those first two steps, I think I'll let Emory expand on a little bit, but once they're in place, the rest of this stuff really starts to take shape. Emory, maybe could talk a little bit about policies and procedures, types of policies that you're often, you're developing on a regular basis, just to give an idea about them.
Sure. And I'll even take one step back further too, Matt, like you said, around, where do we start? It's always the first question that we're asked. I know you are too, from a customer who is now, they have a requirement, they have a need to go pursue a compliance certification, and they've never done anything like that before. They probably don't have a very mature security practice within their company, and that's fine. And it's good that they're addressing it. So the question, though, is always, where do we start? And the wrong answer to that question is, just go out and start buying and implementing solutions, right? And that's what a lot of companies maybe have done in the past. So what we like to do in working with the customer is say, hey, let's make sure we understand what the requirements are that maybe your customer is asking you for, or a vendor or a partner, whatever it might be. So first we need to understand what it is, what's the goal, what are we pursuing? And then we can start to put together a solution around how to fix the gaps. But first we have to understand the gaps. So yeah, we do the gap analysis, which is really a benchmarking exercise to say we know the goal, the future state, but what's the current state and what is missing, which is the gaps or the remediation required. So what we'll do is we'll go through that process through documentation collection from the customer, interviews, et cetera, understand what they have in place, what they don't have in place, and then come back with a gap analysis report, which is a nice summary of all the gaps, all the remediation, all the things that need to be fixed. And we basically break those into two silos, I call it, of remediation. The first silo of remediation is what the Zog team would do, which is all the technology stuff, the tools that need to be implemented, things maybe like antivirus or multi-factor authentication, or a SIM tool or whatever it might be. And then the second silo is going to fall into the policy and the procedure side of it. And what we find is that many companies, regardless of size, and I think many people might be surprised, that the policy and the procedure documentation within companies is lacking. I'll put it that way. So oftentimes we're starting from scratch, and that's totally fine and totally fine. Sometimes companies do have policies and procedures in place, and they might just need some tweaking here and there, and we'll do that. Again, all the goal is to meet the certification or the standards requirements around all these things. So we break all that out, list out what needs to be done, what needs to be remediated, what party would be the one responsible for doing it, and then we move on to the next phase, which is the remediation itself. But to answer your question, Matt, specifically about policy examples, things we're talking about here are acceptable use policy, which maybe somewhat like it sounds. These are, from an employee perspective, what does the company allow the employee to do and not to do? You know, how to use email. And there can, as an example, there are, you know, many tools out there that we would recommend potentially be implemented to help the company control that. Things like web filtering, as an example. Another example of a policy would be access control. You know, how are both physical and logical, you know, how are systems and physical spaces being accessed? Who has access to them? How is it being monitored? How is it being logged? All that type of thing. And maybe I'll give one more example would be, you know, a security awareness policy. This has become a very big one and very important one these days because most of the breaches are coming through employees innocently allowing or, you know, opening up a hole for a malicious actor to come through in form of maybe a phishing attempt, you know, getting an email in your inbox that looks like it is from the post office telling you you have a package and need to click on the link, and they do. And now all of a sudden the company's systems have been compromised because the hacker was able to get in. So security awareness policies, you know, frequency, types, you know, what the employees need to do, how it's being confirmed it's being done, giving, you know, additional trainings along the way. You know, those are some examples, Matt, of policy.
Cool. So as we're moving down the process of what we do, so now that we've got that gap analysis, we've built the policies and procedures, that's typically where Interactive will hand off to both the client and or Zog, depends on the circumstances. So we do work with organizations that have existing IT departments. Some of them have no IT departments. So, but essentially there's a set of tools that need to go and be put in place, whether it is disk encryption for laptop users, email encryption. It could be, if anyone on the call has heard of a SIM tool, it is basically it takes all the logs from every system there is and puts them together. If you're under any regulatory compliance like HIPAA or CMMC, you're going to be required to have a SIM tool. And it's one of these tools that as an end user, you'll never ever use or see, but it just tracks the breadcrumbs of where everything on that network has been on every piece of equipment in there. So that in the event, if and when a breach happens or a ransomware attack happens, we're able to look through those tools and figure out where the breach occurred and how it occurred and how it propagated and all those good things. So they're really powerful tools to put in place, and there's tons and tons of other ones available. Two in particular that are becoming increasingly popular is we're seeing vulnerability management. So a lot of organizations are used to doing like annual scans for PCI or one of the other compliances. Now there's tools that you just leave them in place and they send alerts to the IT group and let them know, hey, there's an issue, you should take care of it. Whether it's a new piece of equipment's been identified. So it's happened on more than one occasion here where we get an alert and it turns out somebody brought in an external piece of equipment like a wireless access point and plugged it in their office because they thought it would be better Wi-Fi. What it did was create a security hole that the organization was unaware of, didn't authorize, and didn't approve. Ultimately, you can put things in place if you think of this stuff in advance to stop them from happening. And then the other tool that we really like to work with is it helps define and protect what applications are allowed to run on a network. So maybe you are allowing the Microsoft Suite or G Suite plus, you know, antivirus and QuickBooks and some other applications. When a lot of times when viruses run, they actually emulate something that looks like a normal application. Sometimes they don't. But when it goes to run a foreign application, in the case of a virus, these systems will actually pick up asking you if you're sure you want to be running that application. And if you are sure, you still need to go get someone from your IT group to authorize the executable as a layer of protection. So at that point, you've identified what you're allowing to run on your network. You're protecting yourself from anybody ever running things on it. So we go through the tool process. We make sure everybody has all the same tools in place. We build reporting around it. And once that's done, we start working on making sure that everybody understands, which is your fourth step here, your training. Emery's group works on the policies and procedures so that everybody understands what happens with those. And he could talk to them in a moment. And on the employee training side, what we work with is for security awareness. We have some vendors we work with where you'll actually have a online training. It's required. It tracks who took the training, who passed the training, how they scored. And one of the things it really does is it helps level set the organization. So if you have 50 people in your organization and 2 people scored poorly, it's just simply a matter of maybe they need some additional coaching or training to understand which part of security that they need help with, because it's going to be through the weakest link where someone falls for a phishing attempt or anything like that. So that's the side we handle. Emery, maybe talk a little bit about the policies and procedures you do training on.
Yeah, so similar, Matt, to what you were saying there, depending on the compliance standard that the customer, again, is looking to achieve, they're going to have different security awareness training requirements. And the first step to that is to implement the proper policy, which is what we would help the customer do. And these training or awareness policies would simply state things like, all employees, regardless of position, need to go through this type of security awareness training at least, once a month or once a quarter or once a year, whatever it might be. And what we've seen is that in modern times now, it's gone away from the old model of, hey, train your employees once a year, bring them in the conference room for an hour, have an outside consultant come in and give them the quick down and dirty version of what cybersecurity looks like. What it's gone to is it needs to be more of a regular training, across different topics, and then reinforcing those topics on a regular basis. So, often what happens is we're recommending solutions that, Zog provides, which might be like a monthly, online based platform that can provide these types of trainings for employees to, run at their own time on a monthly basis. Say, 15-minute video that talks about a certain topic. There's a quick quiz afterwards, and all this is being, of course, logged and tracked, so the company has record of who's doing it and who's not, and then can enforce their policy along the way, which is then what an auditor is going to come back around audit time and look at those logs and say, okay, great, we're meeting that requirement, we're good to go. Phishing, obviously, phishing training is a big one. Having some type of, consistent phishing training simulation tool has become very, very popular in order to meet, the security awareness training policy requirements that are out there.
So I think tying the next step into this is, I always found particularly interesting on the infrastructure side is sort of that fifth step in becoming compliant and secure is making sure that your vendor and client agreements are all in place. The easy example I would give is most everybody has heard of that Target breach of probably 5-10 years ago at this point, where it ended up being a third-party HVAC vendor to Target that had a breach, which ended up impacting Target's production because they didn't have this fifth step tightened down as much as they should. And it's what access do your vendors, and frequently it's your software vendors, what access do they have into your systems, and how are you protecting against it? So as an example would be if somebody had 10 servers in place, and one of them was you have a vendor software running on it. Well, for this case, we'll say Goldmine or something like that. So they're running a Goldmine server, and you have a Goldmine application consultant, and they need administrative privileges to take care of that box. Now all of a sudden, you give them a VPN tunnel into your company. You give them admin rights. But you don't lock down where they can go. So now they actually have admin rights to 10 different servers, and they have access to things that they don't need to have access to, and you've put yourself at an unnecessary risk. So making sure that you spend the time to go through who has access to the network, where they can get to, and making sure that they have the rights, the right security in place. There's case, and actually, I think we have a slide for this, Preston, for the, thank you. So there's a lot of, if anyone's gotten letters that look like this was a recent MSA that came across for it's a local company to the Philadelphia market. They require this of anyone who does business with them, and it's for that fifth step is what they're trying to protect. So they're taking care of their house. What they want to do is make sure that everybody that works with them is also taking care of theirs as well. And part of taking care of your house is making sure that you're putting proper security in place. The second part of that is making sure that in HIPAA would be an easy example for if anyone signed a BAA agreement, business associate agreement with an organization. For HIPAA, it's basically you contractually saying to the organization, yes, we understand what security and compliance is, and we're following all the guidelines for HIPAA as well. That's putting you in a binding position to make sure you're doing so. So, Emery, do you have any other examples other than the BAA where organizations are being asked for compliance purposes to meet that standard?
Yeah, I mean, this has become the norm across the board. I would say in the last 12 months, companies who have never been asked by anybody to do any type of cybersecurity, have any type of cybersecurity program or in place, that's changed dramatically. So whether the requirement is coming from a company's customer or vendor that's saying, hey, we want you to meet this exact, a certain cybersecurity standard, such as go get your SOC 2 type 2, or, go get an ISO 27001, whatever, a PCI compliance certification. Whether it's that, or like I had said earlier, maybe just do an annual risk assessment by an authorized third party. These are being worked. These requirements, like the one we have on the screen here, are literally being inserted into into master services agreements, contracts. Just like insurance requirements have been in contracts forever. Now these types of cybersecurity requirements are being put into the contracts as well. And the ironic thing is, many times companies don't even know that they've signed off on this. We've been finding that, which is quite scary, because they're signing off on something they didn't even realize was in there, and thus they're not meeting the requirement. So obviously not putting them in a good place from a contract perspective. So it's becoming very popular.
So one of the, you just made me think of, there's a third part of this and it's not really something Emery or I deal with directly, but anyone with a cyber insurance requirement or policy, you do want to make sure that the person handling your cyber insurance is also including your IT group and your audit group in that discussion to make sure that the requirements of your policy are being taken into account with your overall security. There's a lot of exclusions and inclusions that you need to be aware of. Every policy is different, and having an insurance agent who understands the key points within there is really critical. And we find a lot of people are handing us the insurance policies and saying, hey, can you make sure that we're able to meet all the requirements of this insurance policy? And I think that next step would be also include the insurance organization in on that discussion as well, so that there's nothing missed. So we're seeing a few insurance companies actually require vulnerability scanning before they'll even underwrite, and this is all new stuff in IT and needs to be taken into serious consideration when you're doing this. And in the front, go ahead.
Well, Matt, I was just going to mention one other thing. I'm not sure if anyone on this call, or maybe someone that'll listen to the recorded version later, is familiar. I know, Matt, you mentioned it, is familiar with the CMMC. It's the new cybersecurity regulation that was put out January 1st of this year, formally by the Department of Defense, the DoD. So it basically is stating that any DoD contractor that wants to do business within the DoD supply chain is going to need to meet the CMMC cybersecurity standard at different levels, but everyone will need to meet that. That's a very good example of, a new requirement that companies are going to start seeing, obviously assuming, of course, they're within that world. And there's a lot of them out there. There's 300,000 DoD contractors, and they're estimating that about 99% of them are going to kind of need to start from ground zero on it. So good thought to keep in mind if you're hearing about the CMMC as a DoD contractor. It's going to be coming down the pike.
So as you're funneling through all this, we've just gone through you go through your gap analysis, we build the policies, implement tools, you train everybody on what you've just implemented, you tie together your vendors and clients, and the last step is if there's any attestation or certifications of compliance. Like HIPAA doesn't have a formal Health and Human Services stamp of approval. They have guidelines, but there are organizations, PCI has a more formal process that you have to follow and you get certified in. It's really the final step here. And as part of keeping things simple and as Preston put it early on, is the easy button. And Emory and his group, they're able to walk you through those processes individually. I don't know if you want to add much to it, but every organization, as I understand it, does it a little bit differently. But you have to make sure if you go through this process and you are required to have some type of attestation that you do take care of that. Thoughts on that, Emory?
Right. Yeah. Pretty straightforward. The attestation or the certification of compliance is just, frankly, it's just the result of an audit. So you go through your audit. First you've prepared for the audit, which is what we've been talking about. You go through the audit, which is the formal process of the audit, to make sure everything is in line and you're meeting the standard across every requirement. And then when you get to the point where you are meeting the standard, then the attestation or certificate of compliance is what's then issued. And that is what essentially is the end goal, which is what your customer or vendor or whomever the third party that required you to go through the process is looking for you to achieve. And you can then, post that on your website, your marketing materials. You can check the box on contracts that require it, et cetera. Kind of replacing, Matt, what you said early on in the call, which used to be when a vendor or a customer would just hand you a security questionnaire and just kind of go on your word that you are meeting all the check boxes. This is a much more formal process of an audit being done by a third party.
So to that point, it's a we have a question in the Q&A there, Emery. It's how often do you think that businesses are being fraudulent with respect to their claim of compliance? Would they rather fake it or be less thorough? And it's problematic in organizations that need to be PCI compliant, but only doing self-assessments. Do you find that to be frequently the case when you are first introduced?
Honestly, have not seen a lot of that. And maybe the types of organizations that would be kind of in that camp, maybe they're not coming to an auditor because they want to just kind of keep under the radar, if that makes sense. Just a guess.
So I guess speaking to self-assessment is that generally the lower, like the entry level tier for PCI?
Yeah, PCI has two groups. One is the self-assessment. The document that's filled out is called an SAQ, self-attestation questionnaire. It comes in a couple of different versions, and that's where a customer, they do a self-assessment, and then they sign off on it and send it in, and that is not audited by a third party. That can be challenged by anyone at any time. That's kind of where the catch-22 might come in. So if something were to happen, or a vendor or one of the credit card companies says, hey, you self-attest to this and signed off on it, but now you had a problem, so we need to come in and validate what you self-attest to, they can kind of come back and put you on the mat in terms of that, right? So that's a big risk. But does it happen? I'm sure it happens all the time. Many companies who do the SAQ, we work with them and we help them with that process because they know they need to do it. They want to do it correctly. So we help them through that process, and we actually sign off on it too, along with them. The other camp is the report on compliance, or the ROC, as it's often referred to. That's for much larger companies who are doing, typically much more in terms of credit card transactions, and they have to go into that report on compliance ROC camp versus stay in the SAQ or self-assessment camp, and that has to be audited. So in that scenario, you are audited by a PCI certified assessor. So no more self-assessment. Now this is an authorized third-party assessment, and that assessment then, once done, gets turned into the PCI council, who also then reviews it. So there's much more of a formal process of third-party attestation there.
So, hey guys, if I could jump in real quick, this is Preston again. I have a couple other questions that people have tossed over to me, and perhaps, Emery, you could help with this. How long does compliance certification take?
Sure, good question. It depends on a lot of things. The quick answer is, somewhere between typically 1 and 4 or 5 months. Big range there. So a couple of the variables are, which standard are we talking about? That's a big factor. And then the other factor is going to be, where is the company when we get started in terms of their cybersecurity posture? A lot of that time frame can be taken up by, the remediation phase. How much, after we do the gap analysis, how much time, effort, money, right, is required to get the remediation completed. So it's, like I said, it's typically about a 1 to 4 or 5 month process, depending on the standard, depending on the organizations where we're starting from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the the one add-on to the end there, and it's on screen for anyone looking, is security and compliance is think of it as a marathon. It's not a sprint to finish. It's going to be something you have to repeat every single year, and you're constantly have to be vigilant with it. It's a ever-changing, ever-growing, expanding, just as technology changes and new techniques for breaching systems are found. New things are being put in place to help prevent that. So.
Right.
Although you can get through the process in that time frame, you're going to be going through that process quite basically every single year.
Sure. Another question that has been tossed over to me, a lot of IT directors or say VP of IT are tasked with, handling this. What role within an organization really should drive the cybersecurity compliance?
Yeah, another good question. So our perspective is that tasking the IT director or someone within the organization who is responsible for the day-to-day monitoring, maintenance of the IT department and security is really not fair, and really doesn't meet that. You want an independent view, if you can. So what really should be happening within organizations, and we've seen this to be true across the board, organizations really should have this cybersecurity is something that should be driven by, company leadership. We often are dealing with, the C-level, CEO, COO type roles, CFO even, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a business risk. It's not an IT problem. It's a business potential IT risk problem. Because we all have heard the stats over the years, and we know what can happen if and when there's a breach. Oftentimes it affects the company in, a catastrophic way, and most small businesses don't recover at all. There's a lot of, besides just maybe paying a ransom payment to a point, there's a lot more that goes into the damage done to a company, things like image. Once the news is released, customers often seem to go away. So it's really a business risk, not just an IT problem. So hence why it should be at the higher levels within the organization.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift as well. So for organizations who haven't dealt with security in the past, to have the typical first couple months of having new, especially tools in place, anything that slows somebody down from being able to do their day-to-day work, it's not going to be greeted warmly in most cases. So if you don't have that buy-in through the organization, it's going to be very challenging at times to get this stuff implemented.
Great. We do have a few more questions, unless you have something else here on the 6 steps, guys?
No, I think questions are what we have left. Great.
Okay. Again, I have a couple more that were tossed over to me. So we talked a bit about third-party contracts and the like. What if somebody receives one of these kind of notifications, hey, our MSA has been updated, go take a look at it, and they pull it up and they see their cybersecurity there, but they're not really sure how that affects them or maybe what standard that falls into? What should they do?
Yeah, so that is a pretty common scenario here in interactive security. So the way that we handle that is we typically, offer, for all intents and purposes, some free consulting and conversation with the customer or the prospect. Just help them understand. We can take a look at the document that maybe they've been handed, the language within a contract, even get into a discussion potentially, you know, on a phone conference call with whomever is involved, just to kind of talk it through. You know, being experts in this space, you know, we can kind of get to the bottom line pretty quickly just through our experience. You know, we have individuals here at our company that used to be on the other side of the desk, as we say, who were, you know, working in security roles within organizations, who were handed these same types of documents and whatnot, and how to figure out what they need to do. So we have that expertise here. So don't fear. The worst thing to do, and unfortunately we've seen this happen, is just kind of brush it off and just say, oh, you know what, that's not important. We'll worry about that someday, but maybe not today or whatnot. So we're happy to help, talk to whomever needs to be talked to about it and figure out what can be done. And many times, here's an interesting, ironic thing. Many times in those conversations, the company we're talking to is prepared based on what they read and how they read it. They're going to have to do all these things. They're going to have to go out and get, you know, 4 or 5 different cybersecurity certifications, because that's the way they're reading it. And actually, we can come back and help change their mind and say, hey, listen, that's not saying that. You just need to do maybe 1 or 2, or do a couple different things of a lot lesser degree than go crazy. So the opposite effect can actually happen than what you might assume.
That makes sense. And I guess the flip side of that coin then, Emery and Matt, would be people need to start looking at their MSAs for their clients and partners and possibly changing the language that they provide to make sure that their partners are compliant.
Very true. Yeah, you know, as we all know, we all live in a very small world, and data and information, sensitive information anymore, you know, is being shared across multiple companies. And quite frankly, many times organizations don't even realize how much information is being spread around outside of their walls. So, and what organizations might not also realize is that ultimately everyone in the chain is responsible. So in Matt's example early on, you know, Target was breached, but their HVAC vendor was the source. So Target couldn't just say, well, it was their fault, it's on them. Everybody's at fault. So this is why this is why in the last year especially, we've seen so many contracts, companies of all sizes are being forced to secure up their security posture, because everyone is responsible for it. It's not just the company that let the breach happen, it's everybody along the chain. So that's just the scenario out there. So yeah, it's important to think about that. We're doing a good amount of you know, vendor risk management type of work here for companies to say, you know what, I would like you as an independent third party to kind of come back and tell me who all my vendors are, categorize them by risk, and give me suggestions on how to handle dealing with these folks. You know, the highs get put in, need to do certain things, the mediums get into a different category, and the lows into a different category. But just hoping that everything is okay across third parties, frankly, no longer cuts mustard.
Sure. We did have another question come up. How has work from home impacted enforcing security parameters, procedures, etc.?
Yeah, so like any other, it has affected it for sure. Like any other change within an organization, it needs to be addressed and it needs to be covered within everything that's being considered. So making sure that the work from home, you know, we for example, we have certain specific work from home policy and procedures that, our customers have started implementing because they never had a work from home environment before or workforce before. So again, it's just like anything else. If you expanded into a new geography and open up a new office, you would need to wrap them into, your corporate, security posture and program. Same thing with the work from home environment.
Yep. And just without, I know we're getting close on time, so there's a lot of new tools out there, methodologies for accessing data that address this. So an example would be, everybody talks about multi-factor authentication, MFA. A lot of the MFA tools now actually have the ability. So if in some circumstances the market ran out of hardware for people to send home with their people, so they were using their home computers, and now you might have a home computer with viruses or issues, on that box. There's no firewall. How do you protect that? So there's tools out there that will actually scan the machine make sure it has up-to-date virus protection, make sure that it has the most current Windows updates, and other things that you need in place before allowing that to access any of your network resources. So you can add in some basic layers of protection, and you can get a lot more sophisticated than that if you're working with virtual desktops and things like that. So there's a lot of solutions in place, and a lot of them kind of came together this year. They've been around for a while, but with work from home taking off the way it did, it really helped that part of technology get much better.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll make one kind of side comment on this question about work from home. Because of the way the world changed so quickly in March, I guess it was really, and everybody rushed to send their employees, keep them working in from a home environment scenario versus an office. We saw, no different here across our client base. Same thing happened where customers who by contract were not allowed to send home their workforce. Well, that changed real fast because it was either do that or don't fulfill the contract. So, and some of these customers were under, like, for example, PCI compliance standards that had very strict requirements around work from home, and that all got put on hold, and they changed it all. So they literally rewrote a portion of the standard on the fly because they had to allow companies to live and operate and still be PCI compliant. So the point is these things, these compliance standards, while they are very specific and rigid in some ways, they can be flexible to a business. And part of our job here too, and Zog's as well, is to come up with solutions that meet standards, but allow the business to operate, in an efficient way that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense, Emery. So I know we're short on time. So to kind of wrap things up, compliancy can be made simple. It is not a static environment. It is something that changes as the world changes. So what we're offering is a 15-minute conversation personally with Emery and Matt. They'll make themselves available to you for a free follow-up, a network vulnerability scan, and we'll scan the dark web to see if any of your data has already been leaked in the past and is out there for sale. That is something that everybody should be taking a look at. So give me a call at 877-633-3964, or just give us an email at sales@zoginc.com, and we'll get that conversation set up. And in a little while, we will be going through the attendee list and randomly choosing a winner for a $50 Amazon gift card. And I'll be reaching out to you personally then this afternoon to follow up and find out how to get that Amazon gift card to you. So Emery, Matt, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules.
Thank you for everybody for being here. Thanks.
All
Yep,
right. Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.